reason and impartiality. As a start, we may note two main points. First, that moral judgments must be backed by good reasons. And second, that morality requires the impartial consideration of each individual's interests. The cases of baby Teresa, Jody and Mary, and Tracy Latimer, like many others we discussed, are liable to arouse strong feelings. Such feelings are often a sign of moral seriousness and so may be admired. But they can also be an impediment to discovering the truth. When we feel strongly about an issue, it is tempting to assume that we just know what the truth must be, without even having to consider the arguments on the other side. Unfortunately, however, we cannot rely on our feelings no matter how powerful they may be. Our feelings may be irrational. They may be nothing but the products of prejudice, selfishness, or cultural conditioning. At one time, for example, people's feelings told them that members of other races were inferior and that slavery was God's own plan. Moreover, different people's feelings often tell them opposite things. In the case of Tracy Latimer, some people feel very strongly that her father should have been given a long prison term, whereas others feel equally strongly that he should never have been prosecuted. But both these feelings cannot be correct. Thus, if we want to discover the truth, we must try to let our feelings be guided as much as possible by the arguments that can be given for the opposing views. Morality is, first and foremost, a matter of consulting reason. The morally right thing to do in any circumstance is whatever there are the best reasons for doing. This is not a narrow point about a small range of moral views. It is a general requirement of logic that must be accepted by everyone regardless of their position on any particular moral issue. The fundamental point may be stated simply. Suppose someone says that you ought to do thus and so, or that doing thus and so would be wrong. You may legitimately ask why you should do it, or why it would be wrong, and if no good reason can be given, you may reject the advice as arbitrary or unfounded. In this way, moral judgments are different from expressions of personal taste. If someone says, "I like coffee," he does not need to have a reason, he is merely stating a fact about himself, and nothing more. There is no such thing as rationally defending one's like or dislike of coffee, and so there is no arguing about it. So long as he is accurately reporting his tastes, what he says must be true. Moreover, there is no implication that anyone else should feel the same way. If everyone else in the world hates coffee, it doesn't matter. On the other hand, if someone says that something is morally wrong, he does need reasons, and if his reasons are sound, other people must acknowledge their force. By the same logic, if he has no good reason for what he says, he is just making noise and we need pay him no attention. Of course, not every reason that may be advanced is a good reason. There are bad arguments as well as good ones, and much of the skill of moral thinking consists in discerning the difference. But how does one tell the difference? How are we to go about assessing arguments? The examples we have considered illustrate some of the pertinent points. The first thing is to get one's facts straight. Often this is not as easy as it sounds. One source of difficulty is that the facts are sometimes hard to ascertain. Matters may be so complex and difficult that not even the experts can agree. Another problem is human prejudice. Often we will want to believe some version of the facts because it supports our preconceptions. Those who disapprove of Robert Latimer's action, for example, will want to believe the predictions in the slippery slope argument. Those who are sympathetic to him will not want to believe those predictions. It is easy to think of other examples of the same sort. People who do not want to give money to charity often say that charitable organizations are wasteful, even when they have no very good evidence for this. And people who dislike homosexuals say that gay people include a disproportionate number of child molesters, despite evidence to the contrary. But the facts exist independently of our wishes, and responsible moral thinking begins when we try to see things as they are. After the facts have been established as well as they can be, moral principles are brought into play. In our three examples, a number of principles were involved: that we should not use people, that we should not kill one person to save another, that we should do what will benefit the people affected by our actions, that every life is sacred, and that it is wrong to discriminate against the handicapped. Most moral arguments consist of principles being applied to the facts of particular cases. And so the obvious questions to be asked are whether the principles are sound and whether they are being intelligently applied. It would be nice if there were a simple recipe for constructing good arguments and avoiding bad ones. Unfortunately, there is no easy method. Arguments can go wrong in an indefinite number of ways, as is evident from the various arguments about the handicapped babies, and one must always be alert to the possibility of new complications and new kinds of error. But that is not surprising. The rote application of routine methods is never a satisfactory substitute for critical intelligence in any area. Moral thinking is no exception. The requirement of impartiality. Almost every important theory of morality includes the idea of impartiality. The basic idea is that each individual's interests are equally important. From within the moral point of view, there are no privileged persons. Therefore, each of us must acknowledge that other people's welfare is just as important as our own. At the same time, the requirement of impartiality rules out any scheme that treats the members of particular groups as somehow morally inferior, as blacks, Jews, and others have sometimes been treated. The requirement of impartiality is closely connected with the point that moral judgments must be backed by good reasons. Consider the position of a white racist, for example, who holds that it is right for the best jobs in society to be reserved for white people. He is happy with the situation in which the major corporation executives, government officials, and so on are white, while blacks are limited mostly to menial jobs. And he supports the social arrangements by which this situation is maintained. Now we can ask for reasons. We can ask why this is thought to be right. Is there something about white people that makes them better fitted for the highest paying and most prestigious positions? Are they inherently brighter or more industrious? Do they care more about themselves and their families? Are they capable of benefiting more from the availability of such positions? In each case, the answer seems to be no, and if there is no good reason for treating people differently, discrimination is unacceptably arbitrary. The requirement of impartiality, then, is at bottom nothing more than a prescription against arbitrariness in dealing with people. It is a rule that forbids us from treating one person differently from another when there is no good reason to do so. But if this explains what is wrong with racism, it also explains why, in some special kinds of cases, it is not racist to treat people differently. Suppose a film director was making a movie about the life of Martin Luther King Jr. He would have a perfectly good reason for ruling out Tom Cruise for the starring role. Obviously, such casting would make no sense. Because there would be a good reason for it, the director's discrimination would not be arbitrary and so would not be open to criticism. The minimum conception of morality. The minimum conception may now be stated very briefly. Morality is, at the very least, the effort to guide one's conduct by reason, that is, to do what there are the best reasons for doing, while giving equal weight to the interests of each individual who will be affected by what one does. This gives us, among other things, a picture of what it means to be a conscientious moral agent. The conscientious moral agent is someone who is concerned impartially with the interests of everyone affected by what he or she does, who carefully sifts facts and examines their implications, who accepts principles of conduct only after scrutinizing them to make sure they are sound, who is willing to listen to reason even when it means that earlier convictions may have to be revised, and who, finally, is willing to act on the results of this deliberation. Of course, as one might expect, not every ethical theory accepts this minimum. As we shall see, this picture of the moral agent has been disputed in various ways. However, theories that reject the minimum conception encounter serious difficulties. Most philosophers have realized this, and so most theories of morality incorporate the minimum conception, in one form or another. They disagree not about the minimum, but about how it should be expanded or perhaps modified in order to achieve a fully satisfying account.